I'm Susan Savette, and I am in the dissertation phase. I've completed all the doctoral coursework about a year ago, and I'm in the research phase for my dissertation. I came out of technology, and my hope is, my work right now is focused on developing my research to go back into technological realms that are specifically working with the development of virtual worlds, because virtual worlds are really these incredible alchemical containers for psyche to reside in. And they are truly a different experience where the people are shifting their gaze into a digital realm. And so there's this transition where we are becoming embodied in those virtual states of being. And so my hope is to work with the developers and designers who are designing those virtual worlds so that we might invite soul in consciously into that development process. And as we alter as a humanity, that we are aware and participating and inviting the soul of the world to move with us. Depth psychology in technology, I think, is essential. When I go out to the conferences and I'm talking to designers and developers and key people that are creating massive games that have millions of players, they are really intrigued about depth psychology. They want to hear more about it, and I think it's so essential. It's to bring depth psychology out into the world to help participate with. And when you particularly look at virtual gaming, it's a really exciting environment because virtual gaming is taking those traditional myths, putting them in a new format, and allowing us not only to participate with that myth by hearing the story, but actually going into the game and into an embodied state. So we're now in a different dynamic with psyche than we've ever had in all of the millenniums of humanity. So having depth psychology, it's a perfect fit, and the developers that I'm talking to are very, very excited about it. I've been surprised at how many of them are really familiar with Joseph Campbell. And since Joseph Campbell was one of the key instruments in putting forward Pacifica, and the whole concept of the hero's journey, because many of these games are looking at that hero's journey. So that's one way I ground the work to them on talking about the myth making, the meaning making through the myth of the hero's journey. And if you look at every game, they're all going through that hero's journey. The other thing that I also ground them in and mention, which I don't think a lot of people are aware of, is how Carl Jung worked with some of our most brilliant scientists very intimately, particularly Wolfgang Pauli. And most people don't realize that that out of science, because a lot of the gamers are, okay, give me the science, let's be very factual. So when I talk about the work of Niels Bohr or Wolfgang Pauli, particularly Wolfgang Pauli, because he worked with Carl Jung for decades and decades. And many of his dreams were instrumental in Carl Jung's development of his theories. And many of Carl Jung's work allowed Wolfgang Pauli to find some of the key concepts that are in quantum physics that he passed on to Heisenberg and he passed on to Einstein. And most people don't realize that Einstein had actually asked Wolfgang Pauli to be his successor at Princeton. And he, because he admired Wolfgang Pauli's work so much, and he returned to Europe to gather his things and decided to stay in the war-torn Europe to help revitalize Europe. And as a result, Oppenheimer took his place, but Einstein had preferred Wolfgang Pauli, and Wolfgang Pauli had this very close 3-decade intimate relationship with Carl Jung. So I don't think most people recognize that how our work is actually really grounded in the sciences and with the scientists that we so much admire. The program prepared me by constantly challenging my preconceived notions. When I initially came into the program, I looked at virtual worlds and virtual gaming as entirely in a very negative, limited light. But then as I started to delve more into the concepts of Jung and Joseph Campbell and Heidegger, I started to realize that there's far more happening within those virtual realms than I initially had anticipated. So it's broadening me to look more critically at both the traditional negatives that may be perceived by people spending so much time there, but also to look at where there's hope and where there lies tremendous potential for us to advance as a culture and as a society and as a humanity. So what I see is a lot of compassion from the students who've gone through the program towards their work, towards really doing something of significance by listening and closely tending to the soul.